breaking down what we've seen through 1 week of camp. But there's a lot of news going on in college football. And I think it was Friday when the news broke about the alliance that is being discussed out there with the ACC and the Big Ten and Pac-12. I've been following Adam Rittenberg's work there, the senior writer of college football for ESPN. He's been all over the place, and I've heard him on XM as well. And he now joins us here on TexAgs Radio. Adam, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Diego. How you doing?
Doing wonderful, my friend. So just kind of bring us up to speed how this whole thing is possible and what is being discussed. Just kind of bring our viewers back into what is happening at the moment.
Sure. Well, after the SEC made its obviously power move, adding Texas and Oklahoma, I think the other leagues were wondering, how do we counteract that? There's obviously an attempt to consolidate power in the SEC. And I think those commissioners are always in touch, relatively new commissioners in all three leagues. And they started some at least kind of informal discussions, but there have been some in-person meetings. Kevin Warren of the Big Ten and George Kliavkoff of the Pac-12 were together in California last week for the Rose Bowl meetings. All three commissioners, I was told from sources, met in Chicago last week as well. So there's discussions here. And I think there's a feeling that instead of just full-blown expansion and maybe poaching one another's leagues, can we work together to create something that works for everyone and ideally generates revenue? Because we know the SEC revenue is going to continue to go up. How can those three leagues, one that's in a very good place revenue-wise in the Big Ten, and other two that are in decent places but need to improve going forward in the ACC and Pac-12, can they improve overall as a group by doing something strategically with scheduling and maybe some other key areas, other key topics going on in the sport?
Is it realistic, though, to be honest? Like, I see it's a lot of teams getting involved and getting on the same page, and is this a realistic proposal?
Well, I think it's certainly realistic in terms of the discussions. And I think if they can reach a point where there's significant revenue that would be generated from this strategy, then I think it is very real. I don't know if all three leagues are in the same place in terms of interest and ready to go forward with something. But I was told even this morning that there's athletic directors that are kind of on a mini council or mini alliance within the leagues that are having those discussions. So it is, I think there's a feeling that they need to do something, that they need to be proactive, and that they need to be talking amongst themselves, especially because I think a lot of the institutions in these three conferences see themselves very similarly. Certainly the Big Ten and Pac-12 have had a long-term connection through the Rose Bowl. And then I think there's a lot of similar schools in the ACC to both of those schools.
Adam Rittenberg with us here from ESPN, breaking down the potential alliance out there on the BCSI hotline. So, Adam, if we were to kind of play this through, what does this mean for potentially the Big 12 or whatever they're called now, the Big 8, whatever they are, moving forward?
Well, I think the discussion for the playoff is going to be fascinating, especially as they have that important meeting at the end of September here in Chicago. When that proposal came out, it was very much, I think, driven from what I was told by Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, as well as Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick. Those two entities, so to speak, would benefit very greatly from an expanded playoff. But they came out with a proposal before they really had, I think, substantial discussions with the other interested parties, the other stakeholders here. And I think that's why, especially after the expansion from the SEC side with Texas and OU, there's a desire to have more of a seat at the table, to have that discussion and to put their viewpoints forward. We don't know fully where the Big Ten and the ACC and the Pac-12 stand on these things. We know George Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, advocates some type of an expanded playoff, but maybe not this one. And so that's why I think it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes. We could still get to 12. We could still have a very similar proposal to the one that came out a few months ago. But I think it's important that those other leagues have a say and maybe be aligned in their position on what they think should happen with an expanded playoff.
Do you think if the ACC has some true serum, they would rather have an alliance with the SEC, or would they rather just stay as far away as possible?
An alliance with the SEC?
Yes.
Well, I think there's some natural connections with the ACC and the SEC through history, right? I mean, you have South Carolina and Clemson, and Georgia Tech, and Florida State that play games every year. But I think from an institutional perspective, there's a lot more similarities between the ACC and, say, the Big Ten. Kind of high level private schools, members of the Association of American Universities, which the Big Ten has all but one school as a member of. A lot of the Pac-12 schools are part of that as well. So I think, again, people need to remember this isn't a decision that's being made by coaches or media or ADs. It's being made by presidents. And I think the presidents feeling connections with one another in those three leagues, I think is significant. Not to say there aren't connections between the ACC and the SEC presidents, but I sense that there's more connections between the ACC and, say, the Big Ten presidents.
Adam, do you see, let's just say they'd come to some kind of resolution, come to work together. How does the SEC move forward? Do they try to add more teams, or are they just going to do what they do? And how do you see the SEC moving forward?
I think the SEC is in a great position, right? I mean, I don't see a lot of other additions that add value to their league beyond what they did with Texas and Oklahoma. You could certainly look to, Clemson and Florida State, for example, are great teams. At least Clemson is right now, but I don't know if they necessarily bring in a lot more money to the conference. You already have a presence in that part of the country, especially with Florida already in the league, and even South Carolina and Georgia is very close to Clemson. Clemson's not this like Ohio State, type of huge alumni national brand. They're a good football team, but they don't make that same type of impact that adding a Texas or an Oklahoma makes. So I don't think the SEC has to do a whole lot more. I know people have talked about the Super League as maybe an end game for Greg Sankey in the SEC, but I think especially if there's some pushback from the other conferences, I don't think the SEC needs to do anything but renegotiate its next media deal and bring in a lot more revenue, because that's what the league has positioned itself to do after making these additions.
Adam, how quickly do you think Texas and OU do end up joining the SEC officially? Do you think it's, now that we've had a couple weeks to kind of let this just be a story, do you think it's going to be 2023, 2022, or are we going to have to wait out till 2025?
I'd be stunned if we have to wait until 2025. That's a long divorce before you actually split. But I think those remaining Big 12 schools who are clearly unhappy and having to look at their future finances need to collect what's theirs. And so it's just a matter of what is the number and when is that payout going to happen, so that the remaining Big 12 schools can be whole financially, and then Texas and OU can move on. Because I do think it's best for everybody for that split to happen sooner than later, but you have to make the finances work. And the Big 12 schools have every right to dig in and demand every cent that they feel like they're owed from Oklahoma and Texas based on the current media contract and the current agreements, the bylaws in the conference.
What about Notre Dame? What do you think their future is?
This is really fascinating because, other than, I think, Greg Sankey, Notre Dame Commissioner Jack Swarbrick was the biggest driver of the proposed 12-team playoff. And it makes sense, right? But Notre Dame right now has 4 at-large spots to compete for every year. It would go to 6. Even though those auto bids would be in place, they would have more opportunities to get into the playoff, even though they'd never get a bye. I think they look at that as a win. If they can be part of the playoff most years, and they should, if they continue on the current trajectory, that's a win. However, I think this alliance, if it does come to pass, will be really interesting because Notre Dame already has a relationship with the ACC, being a member in every sport but football. They play 4 or 5 ACC teams a year as part of that agreement. And then their other non-conference games mostly are against Pac-12 or Big Ten schools. So you have to wonder, if this alliance happens, do those leagues say to Notre Dame, okay, you can have your independence, but you're basically going to be playing teams in our 3 leagues. You can keep Navy because that's a historic rival outside the league. But this is how we're going to make money off of you, Notre Dame. You need to play us. Don't play the SEC. Don't play the Big 12, what's left of the Big 12. Play USC and Stanford and Clemson and Florida State and Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State, because those are games when you're going to market and renegotiating your media rights package, that's going to be attractive to ESPN, to Fox, to whoever you're talking to. You want Notre Dame on the schedule as much as possible.
Adam, let's keep it here locally here, Texas A&M College Station. Just your thoughts on what Jimbo's building here, trying to build off that number 4 ranking at the end of last year. And a lot of question marks are out there, but a lot of young pieces as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this team. It feels like it's all kind of culminating for this year, right? I mean, they took a significant step forward last year, and while Kellen Mond's a big loss, and they lost some other good players, they bring back a lot. It feels like this is the defense Mike Elko has kind of waited for to come together in terms of the recruiting and the development and the depth that they have on that side of the ball. And they have some exciting skill players on offense. I think my question, obviously the quarterback, but also the offensive line, because as you know, Texas A&M has history at the offensive line. It's a place that they've had really good lines in the past. They do lose quite a lot in that group. So how does that come together to protect whoever the quarterback is, and obviously those really good skill players? But I'm excited to watch them this year. I love the receivers. I love their flexibility in the backfield with guys that can do different things. And, just whether they can ultimately get over the hump. And everyone looks to that Alabama game, which is at Kyle Field this year. What an opportunity for Texas A&M and Jimbo to finally take down Saban, and what that would mean for A&M, certainly in the college football playoff race, in the SEC West race. It would be seismic. And so they're on a great trajectory. Now, can you take that last step, which has been so difficult for so many teams, especially in the SEC West?
Adam, so much was made about that big contract that Jimbo got when he got here, but now a couple of years later, there's folks talking about getting him a new deal and a raise.
Yeah, but this is the problem. As you know, Texas A&M, they have their money and they like to spend it. Let's have results. And the top 5 finish isn't a result. A second place finish in the SEC West is not a result. A conference championship is a meaningful result. A college football playoff is a meaningful result. And ultimately, the only result that should matter for a program like A&M, given its resources, is winning a national championship. So, let's hold off on the money, because they spent their money before. What I want to see, if I'm an A&M fan, is deliver, beat Alabama, win an SEC championship, get us into the college football playoff. Now we'll maybe talk about a new contract, because they are under no obligation to do anything at this point.
So do you see the SEC West as Alabama and A&M and potentially LSU? Is that how you see it breaking down?
Yeah, I mean, LSU is such an interesting team, right? Because they still have quite a few players left over, at least that were young, from the national title team. Last year, it felt like everything went wrong for them. They've had obviously quarterback injury already in the preseason with Miles Brennan. We'll see if Max Johnson is as good as he was late last season. And then they have all these coaching staff changes on both sides of the ball and the coordinators. But they have talent there. As you know, they recruit well. They have a lot of future NFL guys. It's whether they can sort of come together enough and really be that third challenger in the SEC West. And then, there's a lot of good teams as well. I think Ole Miss is a good team. Arkansas was an improved team. But in terms of actually having a chance to win the division, I think it's going to come down to Alabama and A&M.
Adam, we appreciate your time, my friend. Thanks so much for doing it. I'd love to do it again.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, it'd be great to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Adam Rittenberg, ESPN, here on the BCSI hotline.